Start recording. So go ahead and unzip those files if you haven't already. These are the files that were on Canvas for week 5, UE Media. And there's 2 folders of images here. And what we have here is an image sequences, folders of sequentially named PNGs. So if I open these up in preview, this is just the Unreal Engine logo. If I step through them one frame at a time with my arrow keys on my keyboard, see it's an animation of the logo, right? Pretty straightforward. Same thing with the other folder. A little bit more photographic and keyed out. But Miley Cyrus riding her lovely cat Shanti on keyed out background. So we're going to bring both of these into Unreal today. It's the same process, whether it is keyed out or not. That doesn't really matter. The eventual goal in this class is to build worlds with video in them, which most likely means that you're going to be using keyed out green screen footage inserted into some sort of virtual world. So I think the Miley and Shanti cat thing is more appropriate, as it was the stuff that we worked with last week with the dolphin riding. Question that comes up: what file format can I use? Well, I'm talking about image sequences, so not MP4s, not MOVs, not whatever other movie file. I'm talking about image sequences. PNG sequences, JPEG sequences. Eventually, I'll start to suggest using what are called EXR sequences. EXRs are very high quality and fast processing VFX file format. PNGs and JPEGs are okay to test with, but they're not that high quality, and they are only 8-bit color, which we'll talk a little bit about bit depth and color next week. But for our purposes today, we'll be using JPEGs and PNGs. The downside of a JPEG is that it can't hold transparency, so you can't have it be cut out of its background, right? So you kind of need to use a PNG at the very least to have some sort of isolated background on your subject. All right, let's jump over to Unreal. Okay, first thing I'm going to do in Unreal, just to stay organized, in the content browser, I'm going to make a new folder. Right click or click the add button, the green add button. Half a dozen different ways to do the same thing. Right click in the empty space, new folder. And I'm just going to call this media. It doesn't really matter what you call it. That's up to you. I'm just calling it media. That's what Unreal likes to call video footage in Unreal Engine. Okay, so Unreal Engine has a newer and an older way of getting video into it. I'm going to start by showing you the older way, which I think is good to know because some problems can pop up. But then we'll go ahead and do the new way, which you'll see is much more streamlined and quite a few less clicks on the mouse. So let's do the old way first. Go ahead and right click in the empty space in your new folder, or you can click the add button, doesn't really matter. Go to media. And we are going to be selecting image media source. Go ahead and select image media source. I like to call this IMS underscore, just call this IMS underscore logo, whatever you want to call it. And we're going to start with the Unreal Engine logo. Okay, go ahead and double click that file. And you should see a window like this. Big black screen. Nothing really in it. We haven't loaded a file yet. This file that we just created in Unreal, the image media source file, this is the file that tells Unreal which image sequence to look for and where to look for it on our hard drive. That's really all this file does. It's basically a loader file. It loads the files from our hard drive and tells Unreal where they are. Over on the right side where it says sequence path, you click the three little dots. It's going to pop up Finder or Explorer, and you can go ahead and browse to wherever you unzipped that media. Let's start with the UE4 images. And which one should you select? Just one. Before I click OK, I'm also going to note that there is a folder here called Proxy. This is something that I created, a folder of proxy images. Anybody ever used proxy media when rendering in Premiere or After Effects before? No one's brave enough to raise their hands? Thank you. Regardless, hardly anyone. Proxy media, long explanation, short, is basically lower resolution footage that you're working with when you edit. Imagine you shot on a really nice camera, red camera or a nice Blackmagic camera in 12K raw footage. 12K, a lot of resolution, 12,000 pixels wide. Maybe your computer is a little sluggish, you're running this on a laptop, things are a little slow, you know, it's kind of buffering, it can't really play back at full 30 frames a second or whatever you're playing at. An alternative is that you can create a low resolution proxy version. Premiere will do this for you automatically if you have it set up. That allows you to go in and edit your footage, and chop it up and move it around, apply effects, do the sound and all that sort of stuff at a good frame rate on your little bitty computer so it doesn't choke it down. And then when you're ready for the final render, you can swap it back to the original media and it will render out at whatever desired resolution you choose, right? So it's sort of like a help to help you if you don't have a computer that's big and bad enough to process footage in real time. Because, you know, editing video footage when it is constantly stuttering really sucks. Similar sort of thing with Unreal Engine. If you find when we hit play that these PNGs that are very low resolution, 1280 by 720, not very big resolution here, if this is lagging, then maybe we create proxy media. My proxy media, I think, is it's not that much smaller, 640 by 360, so it's like half the size, right? So in Unreal, this is something that you create manually. I think that as the years go by, computers are getting powerful enough that this is becoming kind of a non-issue, unless you're working with much higher resolution things. Another thing to keep in mind is that our end goal in here is not necessarily to do our compositing in Unreal, like we did last week where we brought the image in Unreal, we put the stuff in the foreground and the background, and we took a screenshot of it and we called it a day, right? Our longer term goal in here, especially now that we're getting into video, is we're gonna render out the foregrounds and backgrounds separately and recomposite them together in After Effects with our original video footage. So the video footage that we bring into Unreal is really kind of just a placeholder, right? For us to compose our world around. But we're gonna bring back and do the final composite with the video and the foreground and background of Unreal in post-production and After Effects. Does that make sense? So our footage being proxy footage or low resolution or even stuttering in Unreal, not so much of a problem because we're going to re-put that stuff together in After Effects after the fact. We'll get there. We're a little bit out from that right now, but you know, all these things are for a reason. All right. Yeah, just click the first one and click open. It doesn't really matter which one you click, just open. So this is how you import video. If you go ahead and you click open now, it should open up and start playing. You can see my green cache bar down bottom, just like in After Effects or Premiere or any video editing software. You can see how much video of the video is stored in memory. Looks absolutely fine. This is not that high resolution, so it shouldn't be a problem. Okay. Another thing that you could do, if you know the frame rate of your footage, you could click advanced and frame rate override and set it here. Usually Unreal does a pretty good job at recognizing this, but if you know your frame rate, you could just set it so Unreal doesn't have to think about it. Okay. Go ahead and click save in the top left. And we can close this down. Failed to open. Dun dun dun. Did you pick the right folder? Not according to Unreal. Anybody have these files on an external hard drive? You have the extra. Oh, that's fine. Oh, you didn't press open. Oh. Yeah, what was I telling you to do? But there only was open. Was there something? Oh, you didn't click on it. Something simple. Apparently it works on SSD too. I think maybe what happened when that pop-up comes up and says you want to give permission, but when that Mac pop-up pops up in the folder, maybe you can cancel that. But then that will give permissions issues. Everybody else good? Cool. All right, so we got a video playing. We can close this down and move on to the next step. The next step, again, this is the one of two ways to do media in Unreal Engine. I'm showing you the old way right now because it's good to know, and if you run into problems, the old way is what you're mostly going to find on the internet. The new way that we will also look at is only about 8 months old, so it's, you know, there's less tutorials out there on that. All right, let's go to the add button again, media player. Add media player, and you're going to get a pop-up that says, would you like to also add a media texture? Yes, we would. So go ahead and check that box. Add media player. When you click OK, it's going to ask you to call it something. And then when you click OK, it's going to create two things. One that looks like a little TV, and then one that's a black texture. Okay, after you do that, if you click the media player, the one with the little TV icon, you'll get a similar window to what we already looked at, but here you'll get a list of all the different media that you have in your current Unreal Engine project. We only have one thing right now, so if you click it, you will see the logo that we've already seen. That's okay. You can also go over here and click loop if you want. If you had multiple medias, you could shuffle between them. That's not so important. I'm going to go ahead and click save and close this down. All right. Everybody got the three assets down here? All right, let's go ahead and drag a plane into our world. We're in the shapes section is one way to do it. Drag the plane in, kind of turn it to face the camera maybe. Now what I want to do is I want to put this texture, this media texture, onto this plane. Which means we need to create a material for this plane. In order to create a material from a texture, we've done this before, you can right-click on the texture, and up top it says create material. Then you can grab that material, the green one, and drag it onto your plane in the world. And it's going to be black. Why is it black? Because the video is not playing. There's nothing in the world that has told that video to start playing. One way to hack it really quickly as a preview is to open up your media player and then just play the file here, and it should open up in the world too. You just play it by double clicking it or hitting the play button on the media player. But this is not super useful. You're not going to open up the media player to do this. We need something to trigger the video file to start. Another thing you might notice is maybe your plane was turned the wrong direction. Maybe we rotate it so it's more appropriate. Also, another thing you might notice is that the aspect ratio is really squashed, because we're essentially putting a 16:9 video on a square. An easy way to fix something like this is just to change the scale of your plane to 16:9 proportional. So, 1.6 by 0.9 would be 16:9. Now it looks fine. All right. So we have a video playing in Unreal. Now I want to show you how to actually play it for real, because we're not going to have the media player open and click it and pull it to the side. That doesn't really make sense. So what we're going to do now is we are going to create a sequence, a level sequence. This is a new thing. Up top here, where you see the little slate icon, click it and go to Add Level Sequence. It's going to ask you where you want to save it to. It's going to put it in my media file, or my media folder. So up top where the slate is, click this little drop-down button, go to Add Level Sequence. It's going to ask you where you want to save it and what you want to call it. Call it, save it, and save it somewhere. And you will see this little menu down bottom. It has nothing in it right now. If you've ever used a timeline in After Effects or Premiere or whatever, this is the same idea. There is a little scrubbing bar here that you can scrub through time. And then there was a timeline that is set to a certain duration. Right now it's set to 150 frames long. We can change that and modify it as much as we want. Over on the left side is what Unreal calls a track menu. You may think of it like your layers menu in After Effects or something like that, or video tracks in Premiere. This is where the stuff goes. Right now, we don't have anything in here, so we need to put something in here. So I'm going to click the green plus that says track, and right at the bottom where it says media track, I'm going to select that. And then we get this little button down bottom here. It says media. On the right side, it says plus media. Click that, go to media source, and you should see one thing there. The image media source file that we created, and go ahead and select that one. And it's going to put a little film strip into your timeline. It might not be set at 0 frames, depending on where you had your timeline set at. So you go ahead and just drag it around, just like you can drag video tracks around in Premiere. I think this thing is still auto playing. So I'm going to go ahead and, I was just opening up the media player to show you for just ease of getting the video file in. But I'm going to open up the media player again and just turn off looping and turn off play on open. So it just ends. So now I have a frozen video again. Now if I scrub now, nothing's going to happen still. I haven't completely set it up yet. So to finish setting it up, we need to do a couple things. And this is the old way again. The new way kind of alleviates these extra steps that we have to do. So this is a little bit more tedious. If you right click on the film strip for the media source that you're using, and you go up to properties, there's a couple things that we need to fill in. Media source is already set. Media texture has not been set. So we need to click the drop down here and pick the media texture that is associated with that file. When I do that, if I go back to my timeline now, I should be able to scrub the timeline and have the video play, just like you would expect in a video editing program. You hit space bar to play it. Ta-da. Beautiful. Now, the video is actually longer than my default 150 frames timeline length. I could make this longer. I'm not entirely sure how long the video is. So I'm just going to make it longer by dragging this number. And then where the film strip ends, I'm just going to set my timeline there, or grab the red end, work end area, and set that at the end. And that's going to be the end of my footage. Who's not able to get that to work? Remember to save. All right, so now I have a video file playing in Unreal. I could render this out. I could build a world around it. I should feel very excited about what I was just able to do. Now I want to show you the simpler way to do this is using the new media plate option in Unreal. So the media plate, one of the places that you can get it in the place actors window is this section right here called media plate. And there's only one thing in here, media plate. Just drag the media plate into your world and it will be a plane already. Has nothing on it yet. That's okay. From here, we could add media onto it, but the even easier way to do this, go ahead and delete this guy, is you can just drag the image media source file directly into your editor. You don't have to create the media texture. You don't have to create the media player. You can just drag this straight in. It will come up as black, but when you go over to the details panel, except for those of you that are having SSD issues, if you click open current media, pow, it just works. You don't even have to change the size of the plane. The plane stretches to the size of the media. Now, to get this to work with Sequencer, which is very important, we do a similar sort of thing to what we did before, where, I have a level sequence, I've created the media track, all that stuff. But this time when I click the plus media button, instead of media source, I pick media plate. And it recognizes that I have one in the world already. It's going to ask me, do I want to disable autoplay? Yes. And now I have two very similar looking things in here, except one took a lot of steps and the other one didn't. Another thing to notice, this is why I showed you both of these ways to do it. Another thing to notice is that, whoops, one of them has one of them has a shadow and the other one doesn't, which could be a problem potentially if you want a shadow. I mean, it is the shadow's kind of potentially weird because it's a 3D shadow casted from a two-dimensional object, which is always going to kind of be funky. But that's why I show you both ways to do it, because you might want the shadow. Another thing to notice is that one of these is much more dark than the other one. Actually, the one on the left looks very much more like the original files. Pick one of them here. Looks very much more like it, right? That's because this material is being lit by the sun in the world. It's not made into an unlit material. We looked at how to do that last week. So we can make them look similar, should you want that. Let's go ahead and make them look similar. If I go back to my content browser and I go into the material that I made for the old way that we did things, and I double click it, to do a couple things. If I click on the big node here and I go over to the left and I change the shading model from default lit to unlit, everything is going to go black because I need to select the RGB and drag that to emissive color instead of base color. Essentially, I'm making my video a light or a screen rather than a piece of paper. So it's not going to be affected by the light in the world anymore, which is almost always how you would want this to be, unless you're trying to create a video in Unreal that is, reflected light like a piece of paper is. If you go ahead and click Save Now, and we go back to our world, now they both look the same. So two similar but different ways to bring video into Unreal. We did the old way, where we had to create a media player and a media texture and hook it all up in Sequencer. The newer way, all we need to do is create an image media source file, drag it into our world, and then in Sequencer with a media track, just assign it, and it just works. Again, the media plate way is it's less than a year old. It's about 8 months old. It does have some downsides to it, but is a heck of a lot faster to do things. Fundamentally, though, they're the exact same process. It's just the media plate has a lot of these things happening underneath the hood, so we don't see them. Still good to know both, though, especially if you want that shadow, which I think will become an issue later on in the semester. Questions so far before I move on? Yeah? We're going to do the same thing again, but this time without the logo. All right, I'm going to do this again with the other file now. And I'll just create a new folder inside this one just to get clean. I'll just call this one Shanti because that's the name of the cat. The nice thing about the media plate, as you'll see here, is that it's going to understand that the file has an alpha channel and transparency in it. So it's going to already cut it out for us. If we did this the old way, we'd have to do an extra step in the material. But we're just doing the new way right now. So same thing, add media, image media source. Open up the image media source file again. Sequence path, click the dots. Go into the Shanti folder, 0 PNG. Should click open, and it opens. I see a little weird fringing around things, but that's okay. Go ahead and click save. Get out of that window. And you should be able to just drag it straight in. And in the details panel, when you select it in the details panel, when you click open, it should open and just start playing. And it looks pretty good. So again, this is great that we have the video file playing, but we need to put it on our timeline so that it works in our world and when we render it. There's a big reason that we use image sequence files in Unreal Engine rather than video files. Unreal Engine will open video files. It will open MP4s, it will open MOVs, but if you try to render them within Unreal, they're going to come out really weird and choppy because the clock that runs videos, the clock speed that it runs on videos in Unreal is different than the clock that's rendering out your background when we click render. We will click render in here momentarily, but when your videos are image sequences, that means that every frame that gets rendered in Sequencer, every frame that gets rendered here corresponds with one frame of video. I'm just going to save. Don't forget to save. So I'm going to do the same thing. Track, media. I guess we don't really need another media track, but you can. Media plate, Shanti. It's going to pop up that thing saying, do you want to disable autoplay? Yes. Because I want the timeline to control it. And now I can scrub it on the timeline. If you start to have a lot of videos in here, it might start to get a little choppy. It's getting a little choppy for me too. The source is the first way that we did things. The plate is dragging it straight into the world. The plate is just a simplified version of the source with a lot of the things happening under the hood. Another thing that you might want to mess around with, you can see that this image, especially on the projector, but it looks a lot more contrasty than the original. It's not the exact frame, but it looks a lot more contrasty than the original PNG file. This is because Unreal Engine has two things going on. It has that auto exposure that we played around with last week, and it also has something called the tone mapper, which is kind of like think of it like an Unreal Engine base color grading, a base Unreal Engine look to things. And we can turn those things off, but it's a couple different steps to do that. And I'll show you how to do that now. So to turn off the tone mapping, I think we created one of these last week, or maybe we just did it all on the camera. You can click on the little stars for visual effects, go to post-processing volume, drag one into your world. Doesn't really matter where you put it because we're going to have it affect everything. And then make sure you're selected on it, post-processing volume. And we need to do two things. If you scroll way down in the settings, or if you just type in infinite extent, unbound, you just type in infinite, we want to check this box. This basically makes the post-processing volume affect everything rather than just the things that are inside of it. Okay? And then the next thing that we need to do is if you type in the search, just tone, and you'll see this tone curve amount value. If you set this to 0, if I jump back and forth between these two, see that the value really changes. It's affecting not just the world, though, it's affecting the video too. So if this bothers you, you can turn that off. Remember, we're going to eventually do our final compositing of our video footage in After Effects. So the way that the video looks in Unreal is less important. I'm just showing you how to change things should you want to. And now this looks very similar to the original. Not the same frame, but the exposure is the same now. Well, the auto exposure is a little hot. I might want to turn that off too. So again, with the auto exposure, if you want to adjust that, you can do that in the post-processing volume or in your camera if you have a camera set up. We haven't set up a camera yet. So I'm going to select my post-processing volume again. selected it. I'm going to go down and select, or just scroll down to exposure. Remember last week we changed this metering mode and exposure compensation, and change metering mode to manual. Now everything gets super dark. You can adjust your exposure. Now that won't change when I drive my camera around. What was happening when I had this on auto exposure, you could see that when I got close to the cat, I could see the fur and all the detail. But if I go far away, then it kind of brightens up a little bit, especially because I have these black pieces of content in the background. See how blown out and hot the cat is right now? But if I come up close to it, Unreal Engine's eye adaptation, exposure compensation changes. That can be pretty annoying. So I just turned it off in the post-processing volume by setting metering mode to manual and then adjusting my exposure compensation to whatever was appropriate manually. Now again, we composite this back in After Effects. This is really less crucial because the video in Unreal becomes just a placeholder to design around. But if you want it to look as close to the original as possible, then this is how you do that. Okay? Why don't we take a break, and then when we come back, we'll continue with Sequencer, try to iron out some of these bugs that people are having during the break. All right, we get started again. So it seems like we eliminated all of these bugs that we were having. A real easy mistake to make is that there's another thing in here called file media source, which looks exactly the same as image media source. We want the image media source, IMG. How do you know? When you hover over it, it even says image sequence, media sources, JPEGs, PNGs, that sort of thing. Really easy mistake to make. All right, so now I'm going to, have this all set up. I can go ahead and build a little world if I wanted to. I'm not going to spend time doing that right now. I want to show you how to render things out. So go ahead and save your project. Save all. And I'm not entirely sure if this is on for everyone because you started different projects perhaps, but if you go up to the top right, go to Settings, Plugins, I want you to make sure that you have Movie Render Queue turned on. Just type in movie, it will pop right up. Movie Render. Should be on for almost everybody, but there's always a chance that it's not. If it's not, it's going to ask you to restart the engine. That's fine. You can go ahead and restart. So this is the newer way to render things in Unreal. It's not that new anymore. It's probably at least 3 years old, 2 years old. But it is a much better way than the old way. So after you restart, you want to make sure that you're all set up in Sequencer. If you click these three little dots next to the slate, you should see both of these options. If you didn't have that plugin turned on, you would just see movie scene capture. See in parentheses, it says legacy there. It means it's the old way of doing things. Still works fine, but it's a little less robust. Okay. Why don't we go ahead and try to render here? I'm going to intentionally create an error here just so you can see to make sure. I haven't set up a camera or anything yet. I'm just flying around. But I want to render this little video out. It's nothing that great. It's just girl rides cat and then it stops while logo plays. Really, really amazing content here. But we're going to go ahead and render this out. So go ahead and click the three dots and select Movie Render Queue if it's not already. And then you can go ahead and just click the slate button. And you will see a menu that looks like this. First things first, click settings. It probably says unsaved config for you. That's fine. Let's go ahead and choose which file format that we want. We click the settings button, there's a whole bunch of stuff that we can add in here. We can render image sequences in PNGs or JPEGs or EXRs or bitmaps. It's a little unfortunate, you still can't render ProRes on Unreal when using a Mac, which is quite strange. You can do it on PC, which is what I usually use. But that's okay. We'll just use JPEG or EXR. If you want to be fancy like me, you can do EXRs right now. If you're feeling JPEG-y, you can stick with JPEG. Just make sure that they're not both clicked on because it will render both. It's not a big deal if you render both. Just might be a little confusing. EXRs, 16-bit. Do you know if anything about your digital photography lessons here? They should have told you about color depth and how the higher bit depth of color, the more colors you have, the more flexibility you have to make exposure adjustments or make color adjustments or do color keying, those sorts of things. High color bit depth files are quite important for doing visual effects like we do in this class, compositing. We can leave everything else, the default and deferred rendering. Output is the next important thing that we want to set. Where do we want to save it to? By default, this gets buried in your project directory in saved movie renders, and then it creates a folder there. I'm just going to plop this on my desktop to keep it easily accessible. Call it render 1. If you wanted to output a custom resolution, you could pick that here. Resolution in the gaming engine is a little bit arbitrary. It can be whatever you want it to be. At a certain point, your textures will start to not look as good because you can't have 1K textures and expect them to look good in an 8K render. But you could choose 4K here if you wanted to. I'm just going to keep mine 1080p to start with. So other things that we can do, we can set custom start times in our sequencer. Rarely are you going to have to do that. And click accept in the bottom right. All right. Feeling good about that? Excited to see this render? We click the render local button. We don't have a server farm, so we are rendering locally. So click the render local button. And you should see that it starts to render, but it doesn't render what looks like our scene. Epic fail. This view that we see right here is actually what's being produced in the files. So it's not even like that. It's not even like the window that popped up is wrong. I'll show you. If I go and look at my files, well, Apple doesn't like to play EXRs in preview, but you know, it's not the right camera view. If I open this in Premiere, it's strange that EXRs don't work in preview. It's like Macs aren't meant for serious. No, it's not a Mac problem. That's strange. It worked a second ago. Huh. All right, I spoke too soon. But regardless, my point is that it's the wrong camera view. Anybody want to take a guess while it's the wrong camera view? You might not know how to set it up, but what happened? Well, first off, we never created a camera, right? So Unreal's just a dumb program, right? It's only doing what we, the supposedly intelligent operator, have told it to do. And well, we didn't create a camera. So Unreal didn't do anything wrong. It just did what it was told to. Let's create a camera. Just like we did last week, we went to the cinematic option and we drag a Cin camera actor in. You can also create a camera by clicking on the little camera icon in Sequencer. Doing it in Sequencer is nice because it will create the camera track for you automatically. Go ahead and drag the camera in, frame it up. Remember we looked at last week how we could go to this button here, pick our camera. And then drive it around. Drive it around wherever you think looks good. And then we can eject from that camera, stop piloting it. Remember, you click on the camera, you can see a little preview window of it. You might notice it looks really blown out. Even though we set the exposure and the tone map for the post-processing volume, we didn't set it for the camera. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that right now. Same sort of thing that we did with the exposure, but when clicked on the camera. So exposure, change it from auto to manual. Exposure compensation. I think I had that at about 9. Yours will probably be different slightly. Okay, that looks all right. Now I need to drag my camera into Sequencer. How do you get things into Sequencer? The easiest way is just to drag them in from the outliner in the top right. You can also add things with the green track button. It says Actor to Sequencer. Give you a list of all the stuff that's in your world here. But I usually just drag it in. When you drag it in, you will get a camera track, and you will also get a camera cuts track. The camera cuts track, incredibly important. If you ever don't have one, you can add it with the green track button. It says camera cut track right here. I already have one, so it won't let me add another one. "100% guaranteed you will mess up and screw this up a dozen times. Just add a camera cut track. It's not a big deal. If it's not associated with your camera, Then you can click the little plus next to it and select the camera you want to look at. This is probably one of the top 10 problems that students have. Like, oh no, my camera view is not right. What's wrong? It's not rendering. It looks good in the world, but not in the render. It's because you didn't have a camera cut track. That's why it ended up looking like, ignore the noise, because that's another issue that I'm not sure what's going on. But the camera view is like through the floor here. It's not right. Now, if I was to render this out, it would be fine. Because I'm telling Unreal to render this camera view. How can you make sure? See the little camera icon right here on camera cuts? It's also on any camera actor that you have in Sequencer. Well, how many cameras can I have in Sequencer? A good question. I'm glad you asked. You can have any number of cameras that you want in Sequencer. And then the camera cut track is what controls which camera plays when. You think of the analogy that I like to use is think of like a basketball game or any sporting event, right? There are dozens of cameras all around that arena, right? Some cameras pointed at the audience, some at the basket, some doing sideline stuff, some in the rafters, others just kind of floating around. Cameras are all over the place. And then there's a person in a production van, the director, that is choosing which camera to go when to send out to your television for you to watch, right? That's what the camera cut track is. Think of the camera cut track like a director. It chooses what to play when. Most of the time, you're only going to have a single camera. But we can talk about that more as you build more advanced worlds. If I was to render this now, I might just render it as JPEG right now instead of EXR, because I'm not entirely sure why that problem happened. In the interest of time. Change this folder to render 2, accept, render local. Now it's in the right spot. Looks good, right? And if I were to open these files, well, not that file, but if I was to open these files in folder render 2, here's all my JPEG sequence. Hooray. I should have focused my camera better, but that's another thing to talk about. But the point is that we got a render of a video file out. Could bring this image sequence into Premiere or After Effects, and it would be fine. Couple things that we might notice. It's out of focus. I can fix that. And also, if you look while it's playing, there's like a little ghosting that's happening with the video. You see that? Especially like in her eyes. See the ghosting in her eyelids there? We can fix this, but again, it kind of becomes unnecessary because the plan is to composite the original video back in After Effects and not in Unreal. But I will show you how to fix this should you not like to see it in Unreal. It does come at the expense of maybe your world looking less good, but let me show you how. So the reason that that's happening is because of what it's called anti-aliasing settings. If you go to settings, project settings, and in the search, if you type in anti, you're going to see here anti-aliasing. The default anti-aliasing setting in Unreal Engine 5 is TSR, temporal super resolution sampling. Temporal means time, which means that it's anti-aliasing over time. What is anti-aliasing? Anti-aliasing helps you get rid of all of the jaggy edges on computer graphics. Not that, but this. So computer graphics are made out of pixels, right? Pixels are square or rectangular. Anti-aliasing smooths the jaggy edges. You see this a lot in video games, especially in like, I don't know, if you're playing a game that's in like a city or something, you see telephone wires or something like that. Like thin lines in video games are usually filled with jaggy edges like this. Although this is something that is kind of being solved these days with better GPUs. So in order to get rid of the jaggy edges, Unreal does some anti-aliasing, which introduces some smoothing, that blurring, and in the video it looks bad. Usually in the world it looks good, but in the video footage it looks bad. So to turn that off, settings, project settings, go to your anti-aliasing settings. I just typed in anti, and if you change anti-aliasing method to FXAA, that won't happen anymore. FXAA is kind of an older way of doing anti-aliasing. It's not as good, but you shouldn't see those artifacts anymore in your video footage. If I look at it now, looks like it's playing fine. Let's compose the scene a little bit. So maybe I want her up here. Maybe I'll have go into my camera settings and I'll adjust the focus. Maybe I want everything in focus. We'll keep kind of boring for right now. If I go into focus settings like we did this last week, I can click on draw debug focus plane, and it will allow me to change the manual focus distance. Right now it's pretty far away, but if I make this a smaller number, see that purple thing that comes forward? That purple line or color is your focal plane. That is the thing, that is where your camera is focused at in space. And this little purple box helps you visualize that. Click off the little draw debug focus plane, you don't see it anymore. Now everything's in focus. If I changed this to a smaller number, then everything's out of focus, right? Makes sense. You guys are photographers, right? About 350 was good. And I'm not really trying to build a world here, just setting up camera to do things. All right, so we have a camera. We were able to get it rendered out. We have multiple videos playing. What if we do some animation here? Animation of our camera. So see all of these settings over here? I'm clicked on my camera right now. These settings would also, there would be similar settings for any asset that you're clicked on. See the little squares with the little plus icon? If I hover over this, it says add keyframe for this property. I can keyframe the scale, I can keyframe the focus offset, I can keyframe the focus distance, I can keyframe the aperture. We can keyframe tons of different properties for different actors in Unreal. If I wanted to key something with this plane right here, I could key the position of it in my world. I could key the rotation. I don't know if that would make sense in what you're trying to do creatively, but we could do those things. I could keyframe camera movement, which is what my plan is to do right now. So remember, we dragged our camera into our sequencer. If I look at my camera in sequencer, here's a couple different tracks for basic stuff. You can add more by clicking on the plus, but these are the basic things that we would want. The most used things: aperture, focal length, manual focus distance, transformation. Transformation is you can key these all together or you can key them individually. I'm just going to key them together. And we can create keyframes by clicking on the little plus icon right here. I'm going to add a keyframe at frame 0. And then I'm going to, I don't know, scrub forward to frame 120. Then I'm going to pull my camera back. And then I'm going to click the keyframe button again for transform. And if I scrub between those now, I have some very, very exciting camera movement. Probably be more fun if I switch those keyframes around. Started far and moved in close. You can move keyframes just by dragging them. You can also, if you don't want to manually add keyframes every single time, you can click this little key diamond icon right here. This will create a keyframe anytime that you change a property. So anytime you move the camera, the keyframe will automatically get created instead of you having to go down and click the little button every single time. I'm gonna trim my video to where Miley's finishes, as the logo is actually a lot longer than that. You can trim things by dragging the red line to where you want the end to be, or you can click on similar icons in any video editing software. You can click on the brackets that set the current position to be the end or the beginning. I'm gonna just do a crash zoom on this cat's face here. This would be an example of where you're kind of limited by the resolution of the textures. So this video texture of riding the cat, it's only 1024 by 1024 resolution. So when I zoom in on it like this, it starts to look like a low resolution file. So just keep that in mind and let that inform your camera movements that you can do, maybe then you need a higher resolution video to do something like this. Or you just live with it. Another thing to show you about keyframes, if you've used keyframes before in Premiere or After Effects, perhaps, by default, these keyframes have, they're curved keyframes, so they have easing on them, in and out. Without trying to scare you too much, if you click on this little icon right here that looks like a graph, we can get all mathematical in a visual arts school. Oh, where's my... You have to click on the track that you want to view to see the graph. But here, this is a mathematical graph of my keyframe, of the animation, of the change in value over time. And you can see that these keyframes have like a smoothing to them, right? It eases in and it eases out. You could change these types of keyframes. You don't have to do it in the curve editor here either. You could close this window down. And if you right click on the keyframe, you'll see it says key interpolation. So the default is cubic auto, which gives you easing in and out. If you just set it to linear, then it's not going to ease in or out. It's just going to be a consistent movement. There's constant keyframes, which give you, jumps between values. You play around with these different types of keyframes. Think of constant, sort of like a hold keyframe in After Effects or Premiere, if you're familiar with that. The video actually stops playing right there. Quick way to zoom in and out on your timeline and sequencer is Command scroll wheel. You can delete keyframes with the delete button. All right, now I have some camera movement here. Not the most exciting world, but some basic stuff here. We got video playing, we got camera movement, and we learned how to render. Good stuff. And show you some other basic things now too. If I dragged just a basic shape into my world, I could drag this cube into sequencer and I could animate it in sequencer. Can't really do that elaborate of animation. But let's try it. Why is it not adding? Remember, you can always eject from your camera by just unclicking any of the cameras in sequencer, and that will take you back to your editor view. Be very careful with your camera clicked on if you have the automatic keyframe button clicked on, because you'll find that you created 1,000 accidental keyframes by flying yourself around the world. Trust me, it happens. Are you what? You just drag it in from the outliner in the top right. Is the easiest way. Looks like you have something typed into your search right there. Yeah. Really, I'll just make the block fly up in the air. And then spin around. Not very exciting, but a good test. 60 degrees. Keyframe. And then come back down to the floor. You can also copy keyframes, copy and paste them on the timeline. Another thing you could do, we're just playing around now, add a point light in. Drag the point light into Sequencer. See what sort of properties you can mess with there. And there's only a few listed by default, intensity and light color. Those are kind of the most important ones on a point light. But look at all these other settings for the point light that we could keyframe if we wanted to. We can keyframe tons of properties for every asset in Unreal. So if you wanted to create like a flickering light thing, you could. If you're finding that yours is not allowing you to edit it, try right-clicking on it and changing it to spawnable up top. Oops, I can't show you how to do that because I already did it. Drag your light in. light, light. It's okay, it's just a test. It's like every person in the country's phone is going off. What I was saying is what I was saying was if you're clicked on here and you're just seeing things like absolute, additive, relative, try right clicking on, it's not just the point light, but it could be like the cube too. If you right click on the thing and you go to convert to spawnable, then you should have the ability to change the things. No, but it's not. That's strange. Wait, the emergency already happened. Is everybody getting this with the light, or with it? Can you actually animate the settings? Mine aren't sticking for some reason. Strange. Well, you should be able to add keyframes for those properties there. Not entirely sure why Sequencer is not letting me right now. Sure, it's for something simple. Don't forget to save. New section. It's not. Selected time. All right. Let's go ahead and render this thing out again. Now, if you don't see your camera movement anymore, it's because you're not looking in the camera. See, if I look with my editor cam right now, I can see all my camera movement happening outside of the camera. Remember, if I want to see the camera, I need to click on it. Either a camera icon here or in the camera cuts track. Now I'm looking through my camera. Beautiful. Render this baby out. Just do JPEG again, and then I'll try to figure out why the XRs aren't working. Movie render 3. Set render. All right. Looks like it rendered out. Now, perhaps you've never used image sequences before. Let me show you how you use them. So I'll just use Premiere, for instance. So project, import this new media. So the way that you get image sequences to work on Mac, you need to explicitly click the Show Options button, which kind of sucks that it's hidden. And you need to make sure you're toggled on the image sequence button. If I'm not toggled on that, I'm literally just going to import one picture, which the first frame is black for some reason. So there's no video. Import, click the button, image sequence. You don't need to select every single one. You only need to select one of them. I just select the first one. Import while clicked on image sequence. Check. Now I got it. Drag it in my timeline. Boom. There it is. Beautiful. Masterpiece. A lot of good resources here linked on the syllabus about using media tracks and sequencer. really only scratched the surface of Sequencer with this today. There's tons of amazing things you can do with it. If we were to get into animated skeletal meshes, we could animate them on Sequencer, do all sorts of wild things that are outside the scope of our class. Animating cameras is pretty much the extent of what we'll use Sequencer for in this class. Perhaps doing some small animation of meshes or lights or something like that. But camera animation, camera movement, focus changes, cutting between cameras, those are things that make sense for this class. So your assignment is continuing to do similar to what we've been doing. Last week, I asked you to take a still picture, build a little world around it. This week, similar thing, except I want it to be a video file and have camera movement and render it out. So you'll actually be making a render this time instead of just screen recording or screen capturing. So now that this is in Premiere, I could render this out just like I would render out any video in Premiere. It's been a minute since I've used Premiere, so I use Resolve. Exports, media. MP4, sure. Save it in my desktop. Hooray, now I have a lovely video file rendered from Unreal as an image sequence, brought into Premiere, turned into an MP4, upload it to a host of your choice, and then post it in the assignment on Canvas. Sometimes you get black frames at the beginning of renders in Unreal. You can always just trim those out. It's just something to be aware of. Eventually we're going to render out video of the foreground, video of the background, and composite that with the actual original video in After Effects. We're getting there. Baby steps. I don't really have a foreground in the shot. All right, I'm going to stop the video here and just help with any questions. We went over a lot of stuff today. Just want to make sure that everybody's able to do it. But this will be the end of the recording.